All right. All right, any questions? Thank you. You see, they're shouting over there. We're already applauding here, so one-upping Bruce.
Well, welcome to Social Media Risk Metrics. Catchy title, right?
SMRM, as we like to call it.
So, we have a brief agenda for you today. We'll talk about who we are, and we'll talk about what you're looking at and why you might be interested in looking at it some more. Oh yeah, sorry.
I'm loud though, and obnoxious. Even better. Good. So welcome to Social Media Risk Metrics. My name is Alex Hutton. I currently work for a systemically important financial institution that will remain nameless. There I am in charge of security intelligence and response. Briefly, although I'm trying to have somebody else take these things very fast, vulnerability management and red teaming, as well as our GRC function. That's kind of what I do. I worked for a company called Verizon once. I did some risk stuff once, etc.
Hi, I'm Ian Amit. I currently work at ZeroFox, which is a social media risk management or cybersecurity or whatever you want to call it company. It's a small startup. We like doing risky stuff on social media or fixing risk on social media. I used to do computer stuff and hack computer stuff and red team and whatever. You can find it online. We're on social media. We both have Twitter accounts, which makes us social media experts and qualifies us to do this talk.
So let's talk about what this is for a second. So basically what you're looking at is a framework that we kind of came up with to figure out if you have individuals with online presences that may introduce risk to themselves or your organization. In other words, it's a neat model for seeing if somebody's being a dipshit online.
Yeah. Namely your executives, your third-party suppliers, your IT person with the keys to the kingdom, consultants, basically anyone that has any kind of effect and access to your assets. I said yes. Assets in the organization.
So next question, well, why do we want this? Well, there might be a couple of reasons. I'll bring out, since there's this thing called the DBIR, I'll bring out a couple of highlights for you. Phishing happens to be kind of a big thing. Still, that's right. People will not start clicking on stuff. And it doesn't take a rocket surgeon to figure out that if you are kind of a jerk online, well, maybe somebody might figure out how to phish you, right? And this can be bad, okay? Because basically, people click on attachments. Years of research shows that they still will and do. And this can be significant in terms of the common patterns we see about how organizations get owned over and over and over again. I'm just going to bring up cyber espionage as one of the ways that we see this over and over and over again in common patterns.
Now, we're looking at social media specifically because there's a huge shift in terms of phishing or successful phishing attacks from traditional email, which has a lot of controls over it and it's filtered and people are like trained not to click shit on emails, towards social media attacks, which are much more targeted, more personalized, way more interactive, profiled. I mean, it's like you're talking to someone, so that makes it very legitimate.
It's like you're social.
It's like you're social, but you're not. A couple of examples of kind of impact of a tweet or the repercussions. Anyone remember this lovely girl?
Justine Sacco? Some of us? For those who don't remember,
Justine is a PR person who, shortly before boarding a flight to Africa, to South Africa, tweeted this. Going to Africa, hope I don't get AIDS, just kidding, I'm white. For some people, that might sound, and we're not judging, as racist, funny, hilarious, it's somewhere in that range. Justine boarded her flight, didn't get the go-go in-flight Wi-Fi, And during that flight, that tweet kind of exploded. She started with a Twitter account which had like 200 followers.
Yeah, less than 200 followers when she got on the plane.
Yeah. During her flight, as I said, that tweet went kind of viral and went everywhere. I'm not going to even start listing where. And when she landed, she was already a celebrity without her even realizing that she was. The moment she landed in the airport, someone snapped a picture. And that's basically when she found out what happened and that she was fired. And it didn't just end with her being fired and her employer going like, okay, so we got a little PR thing here.
We're creepy guys in an airport taking pictures.
Or, yeah, it got very, very personal, like death threats and very physical threats to her life. Obviously, someone with a track record like that on social media is going to have a little bit of a hard time getting another job. Which again was the case for Justine, and there was a pretty good article. I can't remember where or have the link for it, but you can find it online. Covering that kind of public shaming, the social media thing, and really focused on her story and the aftermath years after it. She's pretty fucked up still, and you.
I just want to know where Dave has been keeping this. It's really warm. Oh, okay.
Medic!
Yeah, no, wait. I saw Katie do it warm. Then during hers.
Oh, it's pretty horrible.
Oh, that's good. So, at any rate...
There's a slight aftertaste of nuttiness, I think. The fuzzing process didn't really. It's not really champagne-ish. It's. Go ahead. This basically affects everyone. All right, every industry, every organization that has people working for them or has some kind of presence online is affected by this. Financial services, manufacturing, technology, everyone. And don't even start with we don't allow social media in our organization. That's bullshit. It doesn't. It's a lie, all right? You're full of shit if you say that. Even if you say, no, we control social media because we have to, pass this by X, Y, Z. Yeah, right. People have Twitter accounts, Facebook accounts, LinkedIn accounts. You can't. It's their lives.
That's right. That's right. So why do you want this? Your organization may or may not be doing things that everybody agrees with, period. Your next reason for why do you want to do this? Some people may recognize this gentleman.
Yeah, that's the name I gave him as well. Because
we're not going to say his name.
No? What?
I'm not going to say his name.
Whatever.
Because I can't pronounce it after this drink. But generally, if you're not familiar with, this guy over the last week, he went on, somebody basically challenged him on the markup of one of his AIDS drugs, right? And he went on and said it was fair, his markup, and basically things happened. All the negative PR that ensued, A, caused them to drop the price of the drug, which, on a personal level, I think is great. Yeah. But B...
I'm sure the investors don't, but...
Yeah. But B, the hacker known as 4chan...
Woo! Is 4chan in the house?
All of a sudden the guy's doxxed on 4chan, right?
Not fun. Basically what you're getting out of a risk metric framework like this is the ability to build some form of scorecard to track that elusive risk with some form of a number, of a score, that represents me versus Alex in terms of our potential impact to our organizations. You get the ability to drill down into the behaviors that contribute to my personal and Alex's personal and everyone's personal risk score in order to make adjustments if needed. And those are going to be very, very clear in terms of their contribution or effect on those score elements. Again, the final goal is to get a grasp on how risky is individual X to my organization, and again, my organization. So we're gonna talk a lot about biases and kind of factoring in the right context, and what do I need to do, or what can I do in order to mitigate some of those risks and reduce them.
Well, and before you move on this, I mean, I just want to say, as someone who has the pleasure of working with some really great OSINT talent, I just see this as a potential natural extension of our program, right? If we're going to be interested in other OSINT information as an organization, why am I not interested in what my organization's leadership looks like, what their exposure is, right? As well as maybe people like, I don't know, people like private bankers, right? Who may have the responsibility of working with the fortunes of some very wealthy people.
So how does this work? We started from the basics. Alex.
So had anybody seen this? This is kind of cool stuff. Basically, these four people are PhDs over in Germany. Oh, that stuff's nasty.
It's horrible.
It's terrible.
I'm going to burp like
and what they wanted to do is they wanted to basically scrape Twitter. Oh, God, I'm sorry. Oh.
It's okay for the first line to move one back because
it's fine. But basically, they scraped Twitter for sentiment analysis around the German election. This is kind of a little bit of groundbreaking work. And what they basically did was they had a handful of factors that you'll see in this beautiful spider charts. By the way, anybody use spider charts? You guys are the devil. Honest to goodness, I hate these things.
I love them.
Islands in the stream. That is what we are. So, but the spider chart is really good at this point because it's showing you they've got a handful of things that they wanted to get sentiment around. Was it money oriented? Were they talking about the future? Did they talk a lot about the past? Right? Were they going positive or negative? Right? It's weird to see a big pull in positive for a different country, right? Considering what we're about to witness over the next 12 months plus, as well as some about what their tone was, right? Like sadness, anxiety, anger, and so forth. So this was kind of cool. And basically, they posited that if people are tweeting about these people, giving this sentiment, right, then you can predict to some degree what the big issues are, what people want to see, and so on and so forth. So cool sentiment analysis. But it's important to say that they had goals, right, in terms of doing this. Now, has anybody used GQM for security metrics? It's okay. Yay.
Wow.
The minority. If you haven't, this is actually something that I use a lot. You can go take workshops on this and so forth, but it's essentially a software development based metric that was developed by this guy named Vic Basili. And Vic basically figures out this. We all have goals in life. It's nice to have goals. We all have a goal that we want to measure, right? Then the next logical thing in this kind of metric development process to ask yourselves questions about how will I know if I'm hitting or missing that goal, right? Sorry. And then finally, you look, once you have some really good questions that you're asking, now you look for some metrics, right? You look to see if you've got indicators, not direct answers like, oh, this metric clearly answers the question per se, but at least an indicator or two that might suggest that you're able to do that. So you see here in kind of a logical model, goal, question, metric. Sometimes the same question will apply to multiple goals, the same metric to multiple questions, and so forth. Real brief example for you that we might all relate to, patch management. So using GQM to create a patch management scorecard. When I have to talk to IT about patch management, I want to make sure that our patching is comprehensive. No patch left behind. The second thing I need to make sure is that it's timely, right? And then the third thing is it cost efficient? So I can ask myself questions around, about comprehensiveness. Am I covering all my business units? Am I covering operating systems? Am I covering systems by risk? So on and so forth. And then I can go get that data, right? It may not be just raw Nexpose or Nessus output, right? But I can take that data and combine it with other data, like, I don't know, HR data that tells me what my org charts and business units are and so forth to get the answers that I need. So this is the timely one. This is cost effective, right? I can start using ALE expressions and risk registers and so forth. So that's a little bit about GQM, how you might use it in your own scorecards for your own organizations. Let's talk about how we used it for this goal.
So we started with a small set of simple goals that kind of adhered to that scorecard perspective. We need to understand how risky a person is. We need to answer questions like, how does one's online activity affect the likelihood or the impact of a perceived or potential threat? What kind of mediums are being used in terms of those communications and how you track them? And we ended up with providing, as far as metrics, a qualitative approach rather than a quantitative one, which is kind of a lie because I started with quantitative, trying to kind of ride the tailcoats of FAIR, and ended up moving towards qualitative with a little bit of quantitative in it. So
math is hard.
Yeah, math is extremely hard. This was our set of goals, and again, we're releasing them as part of the tool that you'll see afterwards. Very, very simply, measurable way to quantify risk associated with an online activity of an organization and its employees. And then it's broken down measures for qualifying and working with third parties, which is as important, okay? And it's easy to measure because everyone's online and talking shit and exposing everything. Create a score for my executives so I can reflect it back to them and tell them, look, you have the potential to affect my stock value or your stock value or your shareholder, whatever it is, if you talk like this or if you do that, all right? Shut it down, lock down your account, make it private, I don't know. And provide those suggestions based on the contributive factors to the risk score that we found. Another goal was to get a metric that would apply across the industry. So if I'm trying to compare my organization to another one, do I want to be, as good as they are in terms of assuming risk and managing risk? Do I want to be, am I better than them and I can kind of, bank on it in terms of my competitive posture?
Well, and I think that's really important. You guys will see this when we do a little bit of sentiment analysis later. But think of it this way, right? The power of your OSINT program to go to your executives and your marketing folks and say, here's how our messages, the interviews that we do and our messages are being interpreted by the listener. Here's how the messages across social media and all channels for our competitors are being interpreted, right? If we're more angry than they are, is that really what we want?
Maybe it is. Maybe it's not. Is it hurting us? Is it helping us? Again, the goal is to provide a metric that you can measure over time and see the effect of different controls and activities. So obviously, we went on to mind mapping this.
Purposely in the eye chart.
Again, and the mind map is going to be released. We're going to have the link on the social medias right after this talk, so you can take it, hack it, change it, destroy it, create your own, whatever it is. The main idea was...
Yeah, I would hope improve it.
Yeah, hopefully improve it. The main idea was to take those three main elements, all right? Is an individual risky? Is a third party risky? All right? And is my organization risky in terms of our social media behaviors? And start breaking it down. So we're looking at the basic elements like likelihood and impact. See what affects the likelihood, all right, in terms of a threat vector, in the form of hacktivism. And then you break down hacktivism into politics and economics and religion and sports and so on and so forth. I'm not going to elaborate too much because we're going to have a lot of fun digging into that when we pop the Excel. We kind of did the same thing for impact, right? What kind of impact is going to be assumed from those things? And the qualitative part of it is basically once you reach a leaf, all right, it's an on and off. All right, that was the goal, to create kind of a Christmas tree that you can turn on and off the end leaves, and that's going to be mapped back into the risk score that we're going to present in a few minutes. We also took into account, wow, I can't see shit here. That's the impact.
Oh, gosh, sorry, everyone.
Wow. Yeah. So we took into account impact that I talked about before. The unsanctioned presence online, like impersonators and fraud accounts and parody accounts. How do those impact my potential risk? An impersonator can have a major impact, especially if that person does not have official presence online. All right, if I pretend to be, a CEO of a pharma company, I can affect their stock price by saying, "Oh, we're going to buy this," or "We're going to, sell that." And
if you don't like what we do for AIDS patients, wait to see what we do for children's leukemia or something horrible like that.
We hate kids. It's like
So the next branch obviously is non-published information. So it's going to be stuff like
non-self-published.
Non-self-published information. That's right. So it's going to be the sentiment analysis that we can scrape and gather. What may be reactions to the tweets. It may be information about those people themselves. Like, for example, we take the Justine Sacco case. She's all over Gawker. She's all over New York Times, and so on and so forth. And so there is an element of that where you can do analysis there and say, okay, clearly the public analysis of this in things that we might call traditional journalism also has some sentiment that contributes to risk.
And again, we put biases or weights that are different for, let's say, if you get to the New York Times, that's a whole different game than if I trash you on my blog. All right, our reach is I'm almost there, but our reach is a little different in terms of the potential impact. So we had to factor that into the model, so you can take that into account and kind of weight your risks. In terms of the approach, as I said before, we went for qualitative. We are measuring essentially. At the end of the day, we're trying to get to something between a 0 and a 10. All right, so it's kind of a percentage in terms of likelihood and impact. We tried several kind of approaches in terms of aggregating the different elements, and then no, that's not going to work. Average doesn't really take into account the highs and the lows. Just taking the highest doesn't take into account the low that have additional contributing factors. So we came up with an additional auxiliary, let's say, weighing system that looks at three main buckets of activity and provides you, X amount of points to distribute between those buckets based on your organization's sensitivity. Essentially, you're looking at something like that. All right, you've got 50 points to score threat types in terms of fraud, espionage, error, and the different types of hacktivism. And every organization is going to have a different way, or even every person is going to have a different way for the kind of threats that I am concerned about. All right, that makes this relevant, and that makes the score very defensible in terms of, you're presenting this back to management. Oh, by the way, this is taken from a previous email I sent you when I talked to you about, Mr. CEO, how do you perceive the risk? Okay, so I'm going to take their biases or their weights and apply to my model, selling it back to them and saying, "Poop, magic." The end result that we currently have in terms of a scorecard provides you with 4 elements, with 4 scoring elements: likelihood, manifestation, impact, and an element yet to be named because it's a factor of the number of or the number of instances of potential threats online, factored with the kind of medium through which they affect. All right. If you remember the last branch on that mind map, it was mostly concerned about what medias are these threats manifesting themselves on. All right. Again, New York Times, blog, Twitter, whatever it is. So we have different weights for those to factor into the number that we're going to see.
I wanted to call that metric Ian-licious, but he vetoed it.
It didn't make the cut. Now, obviously, you're going to have to collect a little more data to base your checking on and off those leaves and plugging some numbers into the Excel sheet. So this is the kind of data that you're going to need. First of all, context. How big is the organization? How many people in the organizations are being tracked, or am I monitoring their activity online? What's the size of the management group? All right. Again, that's going to provide me some kind of measure in terms of, I have a 100 people organization and a 20 people management group. That's a little different than a 10,000 people organization with, 20 people management group. So that those biases factor in and give you context to the kind of risk, because when I look at an executive and I look at a lay person, all right, or a normal person in an organization, their risk score is going to change based on that bias, that management to org size bias. We're looking at locality, all right? I'm talking about one office, 80-person office, whatever it is, and a couple of people around, or am I talking about a bank that spans several states and has headquarters and offices all around the place? Chatter. This is kind of the main element, all right? Everything that is being spewed online by either the organization, the individuals that we're tracking, any conversation that discusses that person, that asset, all right? Any mentions, any conversation that person has outside, like towards the public, all of that chatter needs to be collected and measured and analyzed in order to compose this risk metric. Impersonators, again, fairly easy to identify. All right, or how many Ians are there out there right now on LinkedIn? There are 2. A very poor job. By the way, if you're here, catch me later for free. I'll give you a class on how to create a pretty damn good impersonator, because this is shit. And you're not responding. Whoever you are, I'm sending you emails. Please reply. I'm more than willing to help. This is embarrassing. Identify the impersonators. Identify whether they're malicious, whether they're just kind of squatting on that name on G+ or whatever it is, or they're parody accounts. Again, from a risk perspective, they're going to get different scores based on their behavior. And last but not least, Alex mentioned before, sentiment analysis. This is what's going to give us a lot of context to the way that people communicate about your assets and the way that your assets are communicating towards the outside in terms of enticing threats or identifying potential threatening messages towards your assets.
So let's talk about how you can do this. Like I said earlier, I see this as a natural extension of an OSINT program. And so let's get to how rubber meets the road for a second. So basically, if you're going to determine whether or not you're going to do this, right, you're going to have conversations with legal and HR and some other folks. And as I see it, you're going to get basically 4 different responses. The first is, oh, heck no. Right? And that's fine, right? Your organization's telling you something about their risk tolerance just by saying no. It's not an immediate shutdown, or shouldn't be seen as they don't care. The second is, okay, well, we're not going to necessarily have cooperation, but you can do this. It might be nice to do this for just publicly available information. Depending on how deep you get and what the conversation you have, you might get into volitional. Well, let's ask the CEOs, let's ask different people if they are going to be okay with participating in this program. And the last would be enforced, right? It's going to be like, let's say you're working security for a celebrity, you might enforce this sort of thing.
And
right?
You have to remember that most executives are already used to their privacy being taken away automatically by executive protection. So that's actually a fairly easy sell based on my experience. You're just telling them, here, there's a new tool that's going to prevent your dick pics from showing up online. They're going to go like, right on, I like it. Take what you need.
If only Anthony had it. All right, so the next thing is determine who, right? So once you get buy-in on, and this will probably be part of the same conversation, but once you get buy-in on are we going to be able to do this or not, or to what degree are we going to do this, figure it out, right? The privileged IT users, like that's my goal. I have privileged IT users, they're great people that I work with. On the other hand, phishing them, doing social engineering attacks to them, that makes me nervous, right? Second obvious goal is executives and board members, marketing and PR people as well, and depending on the nature of who you are and what you do, salespeople.
Liars.
That was cool. So there's a great story that a member of the chief security architect of a defense industrial base organization in the United States tells about their salespeople going to France. And this is years ago, right? And so they go to France, they show up, they're very tired after their international flight, but they get invited for a wine and cheese tasting. So sure enough, they go, kind of freshen up and go back downstairs. But they're so tired that they leave early. And as they get back to their hotel room, their hard drive's gone, right? Apparently somebody made off with it and didn't have time to like copy and steal and all that stuff. The hard drive's just gone. It's this sort of cyber espionage that means a salesperson might actually have information. In this case, there were pricing spreadsheets around large, let's call it DIB sales, that were now in the hands of the French government. So salespeople can be a target too. Determine where you're going to profile them. Social media sites, websites, blog comments, so forth. If you want more information about how to be really sharp about this, there happens to be a great new book out with the authors that might actually be here, not just in Derby, but one of them in the room. Woohoo! God, come on, Justin.
Say hi.
Hi, Justin. Right? It's a great book, and you can read that, and there'll be all sorts of really great creative ways to figure out how you're going to find information on people about what they're doing and how they might be creating some exposures.
By the way, my generalized kind of term for where are we going to look is anywhere where you're identified online. It could be, your obvious Facebook profile, but it could also be an Amazon review on, the Vibrator Inator 3000, which you kind of gave great comments on, and that impacts your perception and
You've been
risk
watching
level.
my reviews.
Always.
All right. So the next thing is to collect all the things, right? For those of you familiar with ETL, it's more like scrape, transform, and load. That's fine. And you'll be performing your analysis post-scrape, or if you're really clever, there's already code and examples out there for like Twitter's API into Apache Storm, bolted on, you're golden. But scrape, just a basic example. Here's kind of a trolling account saying, hey, which is more dangerous, shutting down a car or having nationalist jingoist rhetoric, right? So this turns out to that. Obviously, you can do sentiment analysis on some of that by dropping some of the crazy stuff. Next thing, store the data. Store it whatever you want. Now, Marcus Raynham will tell you big data, big data, big data, big data.
And he's right.
That's fine. You can use little data too. Mongo's your friend, etc. The next step is going to be analysis. And you're basically going to have two ways that you're going to do your analysis. You can do it in what we'll call Amish handcrafted, which basically
Trademark.
You have people, very nice people who are doing the analysis for you, or thanks to, as Marx would say, the magic of the big data, that we could do machine learning. Right? So Immashine handcrafted, you're basically going to take a look at the information that comes in front of you, and you'll basically score the comments. This looks bad, this looks good. Maybe you'll use some other online tools to help you out with that. We'll get to one in a second. And there's some links here for you to do it yourself. Now, typically, I've talked about risk to a lot of folks, and people in our industry tend to get freaked out about subjective analysis, even though we do it all the time. It's okay, I promise. This is going to be more meaningful, because at least you don't have to be perfect. All you have to do is cause the conversation to happen. To say, hey, when you tweeted this about the St. Louis Cardinals versus the Chicago Cubs, Alex, you had negative responses and people aren't happy. Is that really necessary, right? Especially right before you're going to Chicago and you're talking to people who might be customers or whatever it would be. So let's, sentiment analysis can be your friend. So let's give you a brief example about how you can do this in an Amish handcrafted way using a free online tool.
So we took one of our friends' long speech, Donald Trump. His speech where he announced that he's running for president. It's got over 6,000 words, and it's actually based on his speech. It's not like a totally written up thing. I mean, most of it's written, but when he comes on stage and talks, he goes off script a little bit. I don't want to imagine what his original script is, but whatever. So again, plug it into one of those tools. Watson has a free open source tool for tone analysis. Plug that in, and you get this scoring. All right. So 42% emotional, 16% social.
Oh no!
What do you see?
Throw it to the side.
Oh. Ooh.
There we go. Scroll back up. You might want to resize. It needs to be a little bit sized.
Where is the? Oh, there it is. Right. Yeah, I know.
Right there.
Boom. I'm a tech god.
So you might want to scroll up and show me.
Oh, scroll now?
Well, scroll up and show me.
Yeah, that's the, you plug in the input. So you got the breakdown in terms of the different tones that were perceived or analyzed. And you can see it's pretty, fairly aggressive, confident, whatever it is.
He's an angry man.
I can't even read it. It's from this end, but it's surprisingly fairly accurate. I mean, not getting into political analysis, but it's interesting.
You're going to see what you'd expect from a presidential speech, right? He's eliciting emotion. Imagine that he's going to be an angry tone. Who would have thought, right? And confidence is a high value. You would expect this. Can you scroll down just a hair? Right? And you can see the words that pick off, that kind of click the different factors, right? He gets cheerfulness scores for things like nice, saying thank you, it's wonderful, and so forth. It all goes downhill from there for us. Scroll down a little more. Other down.
No, this just goes on and on and on. No, wait. There's another one. But wait, there's more. Of course, there's a JSON interface to this, so you don't have to do this by hand, all right? You can automate it. Now I got to move the other one. Wait. On top of that, you can also do personality insights, which, again, for the same text, gives you a breakdown of what kind of personality is being perceived by IBM's Watson of Donald Trump. And that gets him, see this? Oh, that's
scroll down.
That gets this, all right? Boisterous, confident, not art, doesn't care about art, which, I dig it. I can see how that works. And then you get the full breakdown of the different elements under like the big 5 elements and all that analysis. So again, it doesn't have to be accurate. It doesn't have to be right. It's subjective. We don't give a shit. The only thing it needs to be is consistent. All right, so take the same text, run it through it. All right, and it's got to bring you the same results. Change the text, bring different results. So you at least have some kind of consistent metrics that you can say, I can see the change if I rephrase some of those sentences.
But that's just one example of if you are going to try and do this yourself. Just kind of, and that's a graphic that it'll spit out for you. Now there's another option, which is code some stuff up. So this comes from the Breaking Through analysis, and it's on the slide, so you can click the link. Right? I promise it's not owned. But breakthroughanalysis.com blog, and it's a handful of these natural processing tools that you can implement yourself. It's everything from like Python toolkits, and obviously there's R. Right? There's Apache structure stuff coming out of Stanford, LingPipe, and so forth. This sort of machine learning is sort of like Java is to beginning programmers for data scientists coming out of university right now. So at our local program, we've interviewed folks to come in and be data scientists. We'll teach them security, but handle our stats and so forth for us. And they're already coming in with the ability to do this and hook this up and so forth. That's like their graduate program. So there's lots of information out there that you can do this, and that way you can actually scrape, automagic, do the big data thing, and get some information on the other side.
And again, this is not going to turn into a religion argument of, oh no, this approach is better, that approach is better. That's bullshit. Just pick one, make sure it's consistent, and run through it.
That's right. We figured probably very few people are doing this from an information security or physical security standpoint, so we'd put it out there. So the last thing that you can do is run with a scorecard. And again, remember, we're going to give you numbers. Those aren't as important unless you're comparing two different folks or three different folks, as it is to be able to look at a factor and say, you're talking a lot about social politics here in a very angry tone. That conversation may not be, stop it. It may be, hey, are you aware that you sound angry online in your tweets, right? And this person may say, yeah, that's because I believe in that.
I'm angry.
Because I'm an angry person. Or they may say, no, I didn't realize that. That's good. And they may think about how they write and present themselves. But at the end of the day, you've implemented a behavioral control that will reduce risk to some degree.
And really the end goal here is to be able to provide you with ways to reduce the risk. Okay? Those can be technological. They can be behavioral. Like, sit down for a talk and it's like, dude, shut the fuck up. All right? And they can be other compensating controls. Again, we're in security. It doesn't mean that everything has to be technical. I saw it, yes. It doesn't mean that everything has to be technical. You can have compensating controls like legal. All right? Sign this piece of paper every time, you as my third-party supplier, every time you mention my company, you owe me $20,000. Boom. Good enough for me. All right? It could be financial hedging on, I'm going to bet here and here. It could be buying insurance, all right? I have an idiot CEO. Guess what? I'm going to need to increase my insurance because he's just a stupid, liable person, and he's going to tank the stock price.
If you're in financial, that the Basel framework sets aside reputational risk as a risk category, and op risk folks have to set aside capital to cover that op risk, right? This just gives you yet another way to say, okay, it may or may not make sense to set aside some capital because if somebody does something dumb online, like talk about a pill that we're producing, we may have to have some cash on hand. So let's do the demo. We only have 5 minutes.
Yes. Let me just try to quickly fix this so I can actually see what I'm doing. I know the hit mirror, honey. Sorry. So aggressive. So aggressive today. You're hangry. Okay. Ooh, this resolution sucks. Rape the aggressiveness? Rate it.
Sure. So personally, I would use an automated tool. But when you get into these NLP toolkits, what they'll do is they'll have specific languages that are indicators. It's not perfect, right? Because if I look at Ian and I say, man, I just can't wait to come up and throw my arms around you, that might be interpreted two different ways. They're not perfect. But in general, what you're getting is if I continue to say aggressive types of tones, it's going to come across.
See? We can bullshit our way. Oh.
I have plenty of warm drinks. I'm good.
This is the tool. All right, it's a Google sheet that we're releasing. That's got fancy math on it. Not really, but I'm going to do like a quick run through two different analysis. And the first one is going to be Donald Trump. The second one is going to be the Pope. One. All right. Yeah. Okay. So Donald Trump and the Pope are going to have different priorities in terms of their threat types. All right. Trump's going to have a lot of economical and political hacktivism associated with that type of behavior or presence. Vulnerabilities are going to be ranked like all across the board. And again, I refer you back to our bucket of 20 points, distribute them based on your sensitivity.
Those are organizational context.
Yeah. And then influence, all right? So obviously financial influence is pretty big, stock, and then PR and the rest.
Real quick on this one. For Trump, we might think of this as we're in his team for his financial or his real estate business. Mm-hmm. If we wanted to be part of his team for his presidential bid, we'd go to competitive right away, and we would probably negative PR. On those.
Yeah. And then we go off to the other elements that we need to plug in as part of the OSINT that we talked about. So we conveniently highlighted in yellow the areas that you need to fill in. So org size, management, locations, track parameters per variable, and the chatter that we discussed before, number of impersonators for executives and for non-executives.
Ian Licious,
yeah. And then we basically took that big, beautiful mind map, flattened it, and put it in a spreadsheet. That was a lot of work. And then you just need to check off, all right? Put a 1 into the yellow box that corresponds with what you have identified in your collection. Again, I'm not going to bore you through all the ones that we marked here for Trump, but obviously economic politics in terms of hacktivism is a threat that he's motivating. Fraud, display of wealth, yes. Display of power, yes. And so on and so forth for all the different leaves that we've seen in the mind map. Plugging all that into this magical spreadsheet. Here we're at impact. So again, marking off financial, access to intellectual property and technology, level of influence is pretty high, stock value, blah, 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 blah. These numbers come in from the other tab that talked about the OSINT collection and the number of followers and the number of impersonating accounts. And that number is that magical number that factors in the instances that you have identified online that could be potentially dangerous with the medium through which they may manifest. Again, ranking major news articles, independent blogs, or social media. And that will bring you to our lovely scorecard. So you're going to end up with those 4 numbers. Again, this is Trump. We can see that likelihood is 3.9, manifestations is 5, impact is 4.3, and we've got that magical unicorn number. If you look at the Pope's scorecard, it is completely different. All right, the impact is way low, manifestation and likelihood are way high. That number is different in terms of the number of threats that we'll see online. And again, that's only based on the numbers that we plugged in because the Pope has way more religious hacktivism associated with it. His impact is going to be, or vulnerability is much more social. Influence is much more PR. Again, it works because you can defend it. The mind map is going to be online, and where is ours?
So, briefly, how can you help us? Like a lot of the little projects we do, like the NIST, CSF, GQM stuff, like to run this through the Society of Information Risk Analysts. It's a mailing list, but they'll host links to both the mind map if you want to look at that, as well as let you download the Google spreadsheet and play with that for a while.
Fix it, modify it, improve it.
join their mailing list and say, I think this is silly, I think it should be changed to that, and lots of people will talk to you about whether or not that's a great idea. And if it is, fantastic, we'll change it, and we'll put it up there. But at least there will be a memorial that if you do want to do, either the Amish handcrafted or the big data, Marcus J. Raynham big data approach, he's going to love me for this, then you'll at least have a CVS file with some algorithms in there to manipulate and move and use yourself. Thank you.
Thanks.